And welcome back to the DI. On the DI today, we're going to showcase and review the no longer available Atari Vault game with the 50-game DLC add-on. I'm glad to hear that Atari made an attempt at the THX Big Noise here in their logo. Developed by Code Mystics, the Atari Vault with the DLC has 150 games to play from the Atari 2600, the Atari 5200, and the Atari arcade games. This includes some prototypes, limited edition homebrews, and the games from the M Network in the collection. I paid $8.79 for the Atari Vault and the Dreamcast collection, and $2.05 for the 50-game DLC on Fanatical.com. So for roughly $6.50, I picked up the entire game and I don't regret it. Let's move on to the Atari 2600 games. In the Atari 2600 area of the game, we have 102 games to choose from. We are going to focus on the Atari 2600 prototypes and the homebrews in this section, as it is one of the features that makes it worthwhile. First up, the Atari Vault includes the unofficial sequel to Haunted House called Return to Haunted House that was released on the Atari Flashback 2 and is based on the adventure game code. As I had never played this game before, I took it out for a spin to see what I could figure out. It definitely has the adventure game feel to it, but it blends the haunted house elements quite well into the gameplay. Just running around the map, I could see that there was much love poured into making this game. Even though it was made decades later, this is what it could have been for a game on the Atari, and it was pretty awesome to play. Next, we have Saboteur. This game is an unreleased Howard Scott Warshaw game, and it has his signature look, feel, and lore behind it, as it has some of the aesthetics from Yar's Revenge, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and E.T. The Yar even makes an appearance as a baddie in this game. Weirdly, Atari never released this game and rebranded it as the A-Team video game, but that was not released either, so sadly we never got this HSW game to play on the Atari, and that truly was a loss for our childhoods. Now we come to Combat 2. The sequel to Combat, a game I loved as a kid, and my brother and I spent many hours taking each other on in this beloved tank game. Combat 2 took the game in a new direction with newer graphics and playfields, but it seemed to lack something in my opinion. It was really cool that you could build your own defenses in certain levels before the game started, but it missed a bit of the original gameplay. The trees and the concrete walls on the rivers and the bridges added to the new gameplay, but the fact that your tank could take 3 hits before being destroyed made it a bit more challenging to play. And I think with a lot more polish, this game could have really been something. Another unreleased game is Frog Pond. I will say that M Network's Frogs and Flies is my gold standard here for this game, and although it's mostly a clone, it is just shy of the mark for me, but it is not that bad of a game. Instead of a time limit, it was the amount of missed insects that ends the game. One nice thing over Frogs and Flies was the different types of insects, and they looked really nice on the screen. So super kudos for that. All in all, Frog Pond was a pretty nice game, and I feel with a little bit more polish it could have been even a better game. Let's jump over to Real Sports Basketball. This unreleased game was part of Atari's Real Sports line of games. And even though I was born in Indiana, I couldn't hit a backboard to save my life, so obviously I am terrible at these kinds of sports games. This was a pretty nice 2-on-2 b-ball game, and the animations are pretty good for the Atari 2600. Even though I didn't score a point in this game, I feel like this was decent enough that it could have been released. Next we have a little oddity, Holy Moly, or basically a whack-a-mole clone. I believe it was originally to use the keypad controller, and each mole hole was set to the corresponding 1 to 9 on the keypad. But the Atari Vault, you could use the 8-way on the controller to select the outer mole holes and the fire button to select the middle. There wasn't too much going on with this particular game, but graphically it was well done. I think it was geared more towards little kids than older ones or adults. So this would not have held my attention for too long, as sometimes I felt like it took quite a bit of time between the waves of moles. Moving on to Wizard. Wizard seems to blend Wizard of War, Berserk, and a little hint of Venture in its gameplay. It was hard to tell what I was supposed to be doing other than charging up an attack, firing, and running for cover while waiting for the attack to cool down to use it again. And the wizard also walked a bit funny too. I think this game had potential, but it needed a lot more work. It was interesting to see where these development of these prototype games was left off, and if they eventually were ever repurposed for other games. The next prototype has me shaking my head. Tempest. Now, I love Tempest on the arcade, and it's a blast to play, and I love playing it on my own arcade. But I can see why this one didn't make it to the shelf. It needed a lot more development. First thing is, the level is always the same, and over on the YouTube channel at This Is Pete, he titles his video Tempest for Atari 2600 in the curious case of the Space Underpants. And yep, I agree, Space Underpants. With the limitations of the graphics, it is hard to tell what is truly going on in this game, as where the arcade is a vector masterpiece with different shaped levels. Some Atari arcade adaptations, even with the graphical limitations, still channeled the game's spirit in the gameplay, but this one was a pass for me. But I think if there had been more development for it, it would have been better. Next we have Yar's Return. Here is a reimagined sequel to the Yar's Revenge that raises the stakes of the original game. Now you can go around to the other side and you have to work the playfield a bit more than before. And if you're a fan of the original game, this is just a good remix, adding more difficulty to the gameplay. I enjoyed the new challenges it had to offer. And get ready for all-out action in Moto Rodeo. It's monster truck racing with a little bit of Excite-Bike gameplay going on here. You can do flips and pick up some nitro, crush cars, make some amazing jumps, all while racing the computer or your friends. This game wasn't too bad. It could have used a little more polish and this game would have been shelf ready. It was fun to get a combo on a jump and spring off another ledge. I would have been happy to have this in my game collection when I was a kid. Next up to bat is Save Mary. This odd little game starts off with Mary at the bottom of a quarry that's filling up with water. You are a crane operator that has to pick up crates and drop them into stacks so Mary can climb up and keep from drowning, and then reach your crane cable to then be taken to safety. This is a bit harder than it sounds, but after a few tries, I did manage to save Mary. For a prototype, this game was pretty good, but it was developed in 1990, which seems quite a bit late to the party for Atari, and it was never released. And now that we've saved Mary, let's do a bit of treasure hunting and aquaventure. Now this game reminds me a bit of Hero, in the fact that after completing each stage it gets longer. You have to make it past a variety of sea life to reach the treasures at the bottom of the reef and return to the mermaid that will help you out of the water. Once you take out a sea creature with your spear gun, it is replaced with a much faster and deadlier creature, so beware about taking out the first ones unless you have to, as you'll have to get past them once again once you do get the treasure. All in all, this was quite a great game and it was a joy to have played it. And finally, we have Adventure 2. The original Adventure was a favorite of mine. Not only was it a fun puzzle game, but it was the first game I owned that had an Easter egg. I dove straight into the game, and I could see that this was much more robust game than Adventure. I pedaled around the mazes and hunted for items. Even though I didn't beat the game, I was killed by one of the dragons. I felt like this was one of those games that would take some time to figure out, like Zork 1. One of my favorite Commodore 64 games. That takes time and trial and error to figure out. All in all, these prototype games and homebrews really show that there was still some more gaming action out there for the beloved 2600, and it is a shame that some of these were never released. Now let's move on to the Atari 5200 section of the Atari Vault. Now, I never owned an Atari 5200, but I did have the 7800, which replaced my 2600 as it got fried by a direct hit of lightning to our house, so all the games here are new to me. There are only 16 games available in this section, which you can only access if you have the DLC. It's a shame that it's only just a sliver of the 69 total officially released games for the 5200. One thing I did spot on the back of the Real Sports Basketball box art, it says Real Sports Tennis. Oops, must have missed that one in the art department at Code Mystics. First up on the 5200 series of games is Missile Command. This version of Missile Command is similar to the 2600 version, as there was only one missile base, instead of three like the arcade. The graphics are better looking than the 2600, and when the missile hits a city it leaves a crater, as where in the 2600 version there is a mushroom cloud, which I actually prefer better as an aesthetic. The audio and the sound effects are more similar to the arcade than the 2600 version as well. This version of Missile Command plays quite well and would have been a staple in the game library. Next we have Real Sports Basketball. Again, this 5200 version is a massive improvement over the Real Sports Basketball on the 2600. It was changed to a one-on-one game, but the graphics are pretty superb, with the animated crowd and the animations of the players were top-notch too. The gameplay mechanics took just a bit of practice, but I started winning, which would be a first in a sports game. It reminded me of the one-on-one Dr. J versus Larry Bird that I had on my Commodore 64. This would have been a must-have for the console, but alas, it was never released either. Loading up the next game, Super Breakout. And man, does it look great, and it has a wonderful arcade quality about it. One drawback about using the Steam controller is this game would have been better with a paddle controller. The manual suggests a paddle controller or use the trackball. Outside of that, the game is a solid port of the beloved arcade game. Next up, we have an arcade classic, Asteroids. Now, what I have to say here is just my worthless opinion, but I was not fond of this port of Asteroids. On the 5200, which according to the AtariProtos.com, this is one of the launch titles that never got released due to the problematic control issues. But it's a good read and you should check it out. I'll put it down in the description. But anyways, there is a nice particle effect when you hit the asteroid and break it down, but they are all the same color. But they do have a nice negative effect on their color when crossing one another. As were the 2600, the asteroids were different colors. I also noticed that the music and sound effects seem to be higher pitched than the 2600 version. I feel like I like the lower octave of the 2600 over the 5200, even though the 5200 is more like the arcade in its pitch. The 2600 version gives a more intense feel to the gameplay. All in all, it's not a bad port of the game by any means, but I prefer its older counterpart. Next, we have another great arcade game, Centipede. Now, this port for the 5200 plays and feels and sounds just like the arcade. There is just some minor differences between the arcade and the 5200 version, but it is a solid game. So if this was your jam back in the day, you would have wanted this for your home console. Now we have Final Legacy. This was a fully functional prototype that never got released for the 5200. It's a shame really, because it's a pretty in-depth war game of navigation, sea battle, sea to air, and sea to land. The graphics are not that bad either, and with some practice I think I could have pulled off a W with this game. It's sad to think that it was never released. Next is a legend on the Atari 2600 and the 400 and 800, Star Raiders. This version is a port from the Atari 400 and 800 with some fixes, and the controls are revamped for the 5200. The game has better graphics than the 2600, and there is a bit more to the game, not just graphically, but in gameplay. All in all, this game was one of the reasons people bought the Atari 400 and 800 computer for $600 and $1,200, so it seems a steal to buy the 5200 for $269 and play Star Raiders. Next we have Miniature Golf. Again, this game wasn't released either. Steve Baker ported this game from the Apple IIc to the 5200 and used the high-res mode on the 5200, but it had a very limited color palette. When I first saw the game, it did remind me of an Apple IIc game, so now I know why. Despite its gaudy appearance, the game played quite well, and once you figured out how the power level worked, you could manage the levels with ease. It is a shame that Atari vaulted this game, no pun intended. And last we have Zari Arena, yet another unreleased game for the 5200. It's kinda like Breakout meets Yar's Revenge. Sadly, this game could have been quite the hit, but it was developed way too late and got scrapped because of the video game crash. It has really cool font graphics and background music, and the sprites are really well done. AtariProtos.com pointed out that the Zaris actually score points against you in the game, making it a very unique game in that aspect. Even though I never owned the Atari 5200, it is quite the treat to play these games, and I am glad they are part of the collection. And now for the last section of the collection, the Atari Arcade Collection. The Atari Vault comes with 18 arcade games and 14 more with the DLC for a total of 32 games. There are many Atari Golden Classics in here, and some of them I have fond memories of, and a few of them I have never seen, so I'll be going over a few of these in the collection. I grew up in the mid-70s to the 90s, so I went from the beginnings of the arcade through the Golden Era and beyond. As I was going through all these arcade games, one of them stuck out in particular, Fire Truck. There was an arcade I fondly remember going to many times growing up, and that was at Indiana Beach. They had many vintage electromechanical arcade games such as Sega's Periscope and the Helicopter Trainer, and even a Laszlo the Great, along with many of my favorite 90s pinball machines. But one of the video arcades they had was Fire Truck. You could play a two-player co-op driving the ladder truck. I wasn't great at it, but I still loved to play it and have another person help drive the back end. As I attempted to play this on the Atari Vault, I found that I did better driving the back end and having the computer drive the front of the fire truck. For a top-down perspective arcade game, it had some pretty great graphics for 1978, even for monochrome. Fire Truck was one of the most early examples of a co-op video game outside of Atari's Pong Doubles. It was always a great time at the Indiana Beach arcade. The only thing that was more legendary than the arcade there was the taco shop. Well, moving on from memory lane to Maze Invaders. Sadly, this was another game that was shelved by Atari, but I was in for a real treat to play it. They say that it did not test well with players, but I found it to be intriguing and fun to play. Working your way through the maze and collecting the fruit allows the doors to the next mazes to open, so you can exit the maze level into another. The baddies get much harder as you go, and newer things like swivel walls help to steer them away and to get to other parts of the maze. It is a shame that this didn't get released. I think it would have had a chance to be a classic arcade game. Putting the next quarter into play, Monte Carlo. This top-down racing game looks like a colorized version of Superbug and Fire Truck, as it has similar aesthetics for the racing track. You have opponents on the track, but basically you see how far you can get before running out of fuel. This is an interesting progression from Superbug to Fire Truck to Monte Carlo to see how games were improved upon to make better versions once better technology was available. Next up on the playlist, Avalanche. Boy, I have to tell you, this sure reminds me of Kaboom on the 2600, and sure enough, it lists Avalanche as the game it was based off on Wikipedia. The slow building up of the earthquake sounds adds to the tension of the gameplay, and the further you go, the smaller and faster the rocks begin to fall. Again, I would probably do better in this game if I had a paddle controller versus the Steam controller. All in all, Avalanche is not too bad of a game. Now it's time to liberate some planets in Liberator. This game seems to be a cross between Missile Command meets Asteroids. The graphics are great and the visuals they pull off are incredibly well done. Trying to take out the incoming missiles and take out the launching bases on the rotating planet makes this quite a fun game. The challenge to clear each planet and move on to the next wave made me want to play this arcade more and more. It's definitely worth playing. Now we blast off with Major Havoc. I'm not sure where to begin with this arcade because it's vector gold for sure. You start out in a 3D style Space Invaders shooter that somehow reminds me of my days of playing Star Fox on the SNES, and once those enemies are defeated, you have to land your craft on the space station. Then, platform your way through the low-gravity environment to the reactor of the station, collecting oxygen and avoiding the baddies and the traps, and then set the reactor to blow and get out before the timer runs out and escape the station by getting back to your ship. Man, there's a lot going on in this arcade game. When you're in the console mode between the missions, you can play a mini-game of Breakout that can activate your warps with codes and earn you extra lives. All in all, this is a truly amazing game, and I am sad I never saw this in the arcade in the 80s because it is a true gem of a game. Next, we head to the skies in the Vector classic Red Baron. Red Baron was a pretty great Vector game where you dogfight from the first-person perspective against biplanes and zeppelins and other targets on the ground. I did play this in the arcade, but mostly the ones I went to had Battlezone, and it's a shame Battlezone was not included in this collection. Red Baron immersed you into the dogfight with its engine and machine gun noises to the bullet hits on your windscreen on your biplane. It's crazy to think that this 1981 arcade game spurred on many 3D fight and flight games from the PC to consoles. Next, we have a game dating all the way back to 1977, Dominoes. This black and white game threw me for a loop when I realized it's not a domino game, but the player stacking up dominoes to be knocked down if they get blocked, much like the Snake game or the Bikes of Tron. You could play a two-player game, but it also had a single player versus the computer that made it a nice challenge to play. There is even a wonderful animation of the dominoes falling down when the opponent is lost. This goes to show me that even some of the most early arcades nailed it on the gameplay ideas, and it went on to be used in new games later in time. And last we have Black Widow. This game seems to be a Tempest meets Robotron twin-stick shooter. I haven't ever played this game, and I made the rookie mistake of selecting to start off on Wave 21, in which I got my spider butt handed to me. I lowered the difficulty, and I still didn't do great, but it was still better than Wave 21. It's nice to see all the different baddies in the game, and I imagine if I practice more, I could be better at this game. I marvel at how challenging it is and clean the gameplay seems. Even though I did not cover all 150 games that are included in the Atari Vault, I did pick a bunch that caught my eye. It is truly a shame this collection is no longer available. I thought Code Mystics did a fantastic job making this collection. I would have loved to have seen an Activision add-on for the Atari Vault. It's hard to believe that we've gone from this to this in just about 50 years. Playing so many of these games brought back many fond memories for me, and I hope it did for you as well. Thanks for watching, and stay logged in here to the DI for more videos, but until then, Digital Infinity out.